So fundraising in Africa, it's really changed dynamically and drastically over the last 5 years. In 2016, only about 146 startups were funded. Fast forward to last year, nearly 400. If you look at the total funding raised, that's changed dramatically as well. 129 million in 2016 to a little over 701 million just last year. So hopefully looking at this slide provides a lot of excitement, enthusiasm that more money is coming. A lot of exciting businesses are being built across Africa. So you need to keep that in mind. But with all this excitement, let's sort of be a little bit realistic. If you compare the venture capital going into Africa, it is not nearly on the same level as other emerging markets, such as India and Latin America. So there's still a lot of work to be done. But good things are happening, and only good things will continue to happen. So without further ado, we're going to move into our first speaker for today. Our first speaker is Yulia. Yulia is an experienced startup investor, advisor, and executive who has worked across 12 countries spanning Western and Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and West and Eastern Africa. Her particular area of expertise is in tackling public sector challenges such as agriculture, healthcare, and employment. And Yulia is going to take time diving into angel investing and investor outreach. So without further ado, I hand it over to Yulia.
Thank you very much, Andrew. It's a big pleasure to be here. So just to establish some basics, and I'm going to be talking about angel investment mostly. Sorry, I seem to have an issue sharing my screen. Andrew, would you mind doing it for me? Sorry about that.
I can also share my screen too, if it's easier.
That'd be great.
Yeah, give me 1 second.
Yeah, so before we dig into some very pragmatic advice on how to get the right angel investors, I just want to make sure that we are kind of on the same page in terms of the basics. So angel investors are usually high wealth individuals who invest their own money as opposed to institutional money from VCs, impact funds, and so on. This means that they often invest at a very early stage, sometimes pre-revenue, and make a bet on the founder themselves. These people rarely invest in order to have great returns or to pay the bills. If they do it for that purpose, they're probably not the right angel investors for you. And this might result in kind of them putting a lot of pressure, not giving you the right terms, and so on and so on. Most angel investors do it either for fun or to be able to be part of something big, exceptional, and new, and sort of like put themselves on a pedestal of supporting social causes they care about, or being part of that young entrepreneurial network in one way or another. In general, angel investing is a lot easier for the founders to get and more flexible because these are individual money, right? So they don't have to follow a lot of rules and those robust processes that VCs have, for instance. And so the reason angel investing exists is that they kind of provide that bridge for early entrepreneurs before you encounter that world of kind of demonic and predatory venture capital. Now, going back to how do you get the right angel investor? What are the basic truths of that game? First of all, what I see a lot is two bad routes that early startups take. One is that they really go for anyone who are willing to give them any amount of money. So being friends, relatives, any kind of individuals who are willing to invest even a little bit, which is not optimal because then it requires a lot of effort. And then you're not really getting much apart from money from those investors. Now, the other extreme, which is also not ideal, is when entrepreneurs go for one rich person who is willing to give them the whole, I don't know, 50, 100,000 whole seed or pre-seed money, which is again quite risky because then you become dependent on that one individual and you're really stuck with them, and you rely a lot on that single network, that single domain of expertise. So what I would advise doing is really develop a good target list of investors. And then there are several ways to drill that down, right? You might focus on a specific topic, and a lot of angel investors do announce their interest. So for instance, they only want to invest in healthcare or fintech or another specific topic. And then you want to make sure that each of them is able to invest, let's say, at least $15,000, and also looking to build a portfolio of investments. So you would want to make sure that they can at least invest in 4 or 5 of enterprises, so that they're a real angel investor instead of making one enterprise and then really hoping to make a lot of returns on that. I would also very much encourage, and this is to the point that angel investors can be very different. There are a lot of different types of personalities that masquerade as angel investors. For instance, a lot of so-called service providers who would be meeting with you, saying they're angel investors and potentially being willing to invest $1,000 to $5,000, but with the goal to sell you some kind of service with a retainer. So you don't really want to speak to them. So do invest your time in due diligence. Check their references if you can, ask around about them. Now, the second very important point is that when you get an angel investor, it's not about the money. So anyone who has $1 can give you $1. What you want is a lot more. So of course, the core of this transaction is capital. And this is why you're speaking to them. But you really want smart money. And what smart money means is both being able to tap in their network and them really willing to promote you, get you the right introductions, both to bring other investors as well as potentially customers and partners. And then the second important thing is that they might provide a lot of expertise, mentorship, and knowledge in their own areas. And you might also use it as a way to kind of de-risk your enterprise in the face of other investors. So let's say you want to start something in health insurance, and you don't have any background in insurance or any financial product. So getting an investor who is, let's say, an insurance executive can both help you to get access to that network, get that expertise, as well as remove that fear in the face of other investors that you have that gap in your background and you won't be able to deliver. Now, following Groucho Marx's wisdom, it's very important to create that impression of scarcity. So no one really, and particularly sophisticated, well-established angel investors, don't want to invest in anything that anyone else can invest in. So drawing an analogy with crowdfunding campaigns, for example, they often give those people who invest some kind of exclusive access to the product, some other privileges. So you want to have the same in this relationship. And so I don't mean always be truthful and authentic, never lie, but it is important to sort of have a conversation that demonstrates that you might have a lot of interest, and then not being really too desperate and focusing on getting the money. Saying something like, we might be raising in a few months, we still don't know if we do. In case we do, would you be interested in this, and like what an ideal investment would look like for you? Another piece of advice I would give is that invest in field work. So I very often get investor pitches that are 10, 20 pages long, that have a lot of details that at this point are unnecessary or are more of a fantasy, like for instance, very detailed cash flows. And the thought that comes to mind is, why do you invest all this time at this stage in crafting this document? I would rather you go out in the field, try to understand your customer better, try to understand what the problem is. So I would really want to see, ideally, a very short document. Sometimes it's not even necessary to have that. What I would like to see as an angel investor is that you have that customer obsession, and you have that grit to really understand what the customers are trying to do and how to help them, instead of drafting that 20-page document. Now, another element of this is that I think it's never too early to invest in traction. And there are several ways to demonstrate it. You don't necessarily have to have revenue. You might have a waiting list or some other indication that there's a strong interest in the product. And this is something that is probably one of the 3 criteria that I pay attention to, for instance. So make sure you demonstrate that there's an interest for what you're doing. One other small piece of advice here is that I, for instance, often receive documents that seem very generic. So for instance, founders send the same document to their customers, to investors, everyone else. And that just demonstrates that they don't really take time to think about who their audience is. So that's also, I think, really important. Before, and if you reach out, try to find out something about the person's background, who they are, what aspects they might be interested in. Finally, we often hear that early stage investing is all about narratives. And of course, because this is individual decision making. So again, they're not institutional investors who have to go through those rules, robust processes. There's a lot more space for those cognitive biases and heuristics. However, a smart investor would not be fooled by your narrative. A smart investor would be able to recognize a narrative that other people would be fooled by. So I think it's important to understand that. So when you're crafting your narrative, make sure that it's very personal. It becomes obvious why you're the right person to do that, why this problem is important to you, why you're so passionate about it, so that you don't give up in a few months, but you're really excited about solving it. And then and here I think there are different preferences. So I, for instance, look for a founder who is not this kind of larger than life person. And then they present themselves to be the superhero. They know everything. They can solve all the silos, all the gaps that they have in their business, but more of a person who can build a team and build an organization so that as a team, you build that company. And of course, there are a lot of angel investors who go for a different type. In terms of having a solo founder versus co-founders, which is another important element of the story. I know that a lot of investors have this bias towards co-founders for various reasons. So do VCs. What I've seen is that there's no evidence that co-founded enterprises have high returns or are more successful. I do believe it's more of a bias. And when I see a team of co-founders, 2, 3, 4 people, what's really important for me to see is that they're not the same type of person. So if these are 3 alumni of the same university, or let's say McKinsey alumni, they have very similar backgrounds, it's a very bad signal in my case, just because I understand that you're getting one person, one brain for the price of 3. And so in case of co-founders, what's really important is to see that each of them will bring a lot of value, and that there's some kind of diversity, which again makes a difference for decision making. Now, yeah, we can go to the next page. So, having spoken a bit about what to look for an investor, now who would be kind of the best angel you're aiming for? So again, what you want to have is someone who can serve as a very strong brand, who would then convince and bring a lot of other investors. And then usually that would be the person who have expressed or demonstrated an interest in angel investing, rather than just being an individual with a lot of money. And then you would ideally want them to have expertise and domain knowledge in your area, which I think we already spoke about. And that could also cover any of the gaps that you might have in your team or in your network. However, it's also important to say that there should be a balance in that. So for instance, if I invest in a startup and I understand that to help them become successful, I need to spend a lot of hours helping them figure out the complicated supply chain. This is not a great investment for me. It always has to be a team that is self-sufficient and doesn't require all this too much hand-holding or too much expertise from the investor. One important thing is that you would want to identify people who are similar to you. And the easiest way to do that is to look for demographic fit, which could be, age, education, as well as gender. Maybe you're a minority founder and they represent the same minority. This very much creates an illusion of kinship, which then motivates us to support each other. So you might want to go for an investor who has a strong passion for the idea for the problem you're solving, hoping that then they will really extend to help you. But then the easiest way, the most effective way to do it is look for someone who is similar to you. And then my advice would be try to focus on those who operate in your region, just because otherwise it becomes much more difficult to engage, and also use their network and their expertise and so on.
Yulia, can I just jump in there? I just want to say thank you for taking us through angel investing. Love to pass it over to Agostine, if that's all right. But thank you for your presentation. I'm sure there's plenty of questions that the audience will have for you a little bit later on in our presentation today. So moving on to our next speaker, his name is Agostine. Agostine is a management professional with over 8 years of experience in the African social enterprise and impact investing space. He's worked with leading organizations such as Ashoka, Impact Hub, and Telecap, who are the people behind the SoundCulp Forum, and Endeavor. So Augustine's going to dive into impact investments and grants. So over to you, Agostine.
All right. Thank you so much, Andrew, and Yulia as well for your opening presentation. Many thanks to Jordan and the BfE team as well for bringing this event together. I'm quite excited actually to talk about this topic because it's one that really, I would say it's a hot topic in the area that I've been working on for the last 8 years. And then, of course, a lot of the comments and presentation that Yulia just gave us are quite relevant for our market in the sense that angel investing, for example, is on the rise in terms of the number of people who are interested in going into angel investing, as well as startups and young companies which are looking for angel investments. And I've actually been involved in quite a number of conversations in the last couple of let's say years, where a lot of people are basically now forming syndicates, let's say in Nairobi, to do the angel investing or to do angel investing together as a team. So while I wanted to actually focus my brief presentation on essentially the question of whether you as an entrepreneur, you should go for grants or essentially commercial capital in the sense of the definition of impact investing is still more or less ambiguous. In some cases, it's actually quite contentious. Does, let's say, grant funding from USAID constitute impact investing, or does an investment from a real fund, and there are quite a number that actually focus on impact investing or actually articulate impact investing as their strategy. So what is really impact investing relative to this question on the type of funding that as an entrepreneur you'd be looking for when you're seeking impact investments? So I basically thought I would go through a series of questions that I advise entrepreneurs to go through when you're thinking through what type of funding to go for, especially when you're looking for impact investments, because then that field becomes quite a broad sort of a set of ideas in terms of the investors who are in the market, the type of funding they're giving, the amounts of funding they're giving. So what are some of the questions that you can use as an entrepreneur to organize and really decide for yourself what type of funding you should be pursuing? And the first question there, of course, is whether you should be going for grant funding or what we call soft capital or hard capital in terms of commercial investment. And in most cases, this is actually a question that comes out as an either or question rather than both and. Personally, I always fall on the both and side, and especially when looking at the Kenya or East Africa, Africa in general market, you don't want to close the doors to the type of investment that you're looking for your business, especially when you're an early stage company. What you're really looking for is the relationship or the team that is going to help you build this business or this startup that you're creating. So by thinking about the investors that you're bringing on board as a member of your team, rather than an external party who is giving you a type of money that it's going to be a very different relationship, really think of it as you will most likely be able to attract, especially in the idea stage, you'll be able to attract soft capital as well as hard capital, right? And so for me, the question is neither choosing one of the two, but actually deciding when is the right time to go for either of the two. So one point there is on timing. So how do you think about timing as a business? Of course, from the outside, we define businesses in several lanes, right? So you go from early stage, idea stage, pre-revenue, all the way to growth stage, let's say actually companies that are scaling outside of their borders. And so the stage at which you're in as a business, that's really what should determine the type of capital, the type of investor that you're pursuing. Going with, again, what Yulia also mentioned, which is if you're an early stage company and you're looking, let's say, to an angel investor, but more so you're looking at, let's say, the impact investing field generally, because you're also impact driven, you're a mission driven organization, you're looking to do good in the world, and you maybe even be a for-profit company. I would say that in the earliest stage, it's actually advantageous to go for soft capital because this really helps you to subsidize the cost of starting a business. Now, the reason for this, especially for our market in Africa, is that it's a very dynamic market. There are so many risk factors. IP rights and protections are not there, right? You have to really build a solid brand in the market in order to be able to compete, especially for commercial capital. And even when you can get that commercial capital, to be able to deploy it and use it in the right way, right? So it's actually a strategic thing to go for soft capital in the earlier stages of the business. And then as the business is developing, as you're basically getting to your product market fit, at that point, then you can look at transitioning the type of capital that you can attract. Now, this is very unique for our market, especially I would say from a Kenya, East Africa perspective, because the majority of the capital in the market anyway is actually soft capital, it's grant capital. And the context for this is that we are coming from, let's say, the 90s period where a lot of the investment coming into the region would be coming from development partners, and it will go to NGOs or nonprofits. And then in the last decade or so, there was a mental shift that started actually not just from the investment community, but also from governments. You've had governments beginning to say, and very specifically, for example, the Dutch government saying 2021 is our target year to shift the relationship between Kenya and the Netherlands from aid to trade. So beginning this year, the Netherlands government is actually not giving funding that goes to nonprofits or for development purposes. It's actually channeling those investments or support through investors to companies as an aspect of sustainability, right? So a majority of the money in the market, especially for early stage companies, is soft money. So don't shy away from using it. Just have a plan for when you're going to transition to hard capital. So basically, the either or, I go for both ends. And then the most important next question after that is when is the right time to actually go for which capital, and not what is the right capital to go for. When is the right time? That's the most important question there. Now, the third question here is actually on local versus global capital. Majority, in fact, of local capital, if you're to say, let's say, go for angel investors in any market, you hardly find angel investors who are giving you cash as a nonprofit, right? Unless you're in the US, where you can actually get, or the investor can get sort of a tax credit for that, right? So if you're looking for local capital within the continent, much harder to get soft capital unless you're going through development partners who are actually sort of dispersing funds, let's say from the big global players, the USAIDs and let's say even the Gates Foundation. So if you're going for local capital, you want to build long-term sustainable relationships. And it's much better in that case to actually pursue commercial capital as opposed to grant capital. If you're fundraising globally, of course, you're actually risking the fact that your market has a certain Forex exchange rate, right? So you might be borrowing money at a much higher rate in terms of interest compared to what you would be getting locally based on the currency fluctuations. So again, this is not a question of whether you should go for either or, but really look at the specific context of your business. And then based on each of that context, then you can determine whether you're going to go for local grant commercial capital or global or external international commercial capital. Now, the fourth question here is actually, again, related to the geography. Is the market that you're operating in an investor-driven market or an entrepreneur-driven market? Now, the difference between these two is a bit of a nuance, and it can be ambiguous in different contexts. But the way that I like to look at this is from the negotiation standpoint. If you're actually negotiating for an investment, you're actually discussing the term sheet or the proposal. If this investor actually knows the market a lot more than you, they have invested in the market, they know about the different players in the different value chains, this is an investor-driven market. And in that case, you're actually going to have to look at that investor as a partner who is also going to contribute to the business. And in that case, the interest of the investor is significantly higher from, let's say, when you're submitting a grant application from your office in Nairobi to, let's say, a funder in London or in New York, right? They really don't understand the market as you would, but then it means that you have to take the role of educating the investor to understand about the market that you're operating in, what's the, let's say, total addressable market opportunity in Kenya for agriculture supply chain, right? Or what's the total addressable market for healthcare services, e-healthcare in Africa, right? So if that's your focus, and you know that the investor that you're pitching is not necessarily very familiar with your market, then you want to actually educate them. But remember that as you're educating them through your pitch, this is also going to become a piece of work in terms of how you're going to be reporting, keeping them up to date, and even leveraging them as a potential or as a partner for your business. And in that case, it's actually far less advisable to go for commercial capital because then the terms of that relationship can be too transactional. The investor doesn't understand your market. You're also constantly trying to educate them. You might get into conflict. And we've had a lot of cases of companies which actually go for that sort of commercial capital because it's attractive, it's big, it's external, but the investor doesn't understand your market. It might be easy, it might be sexy, you might have a very good pitch and they actually understand it, but down the road that creates a lot of challenges in terms of maintaining that relationship. So in the case of investors who really don't understand your market much better to go with soft capital, especially in the earlier stages, because then you're actually going to develop that relationship over time and be able to transition that investor. You could even transition the same investor to a commercial or otherwise investment. And then finally, there is a question that I often get when I'm looking at especially African enterprises looking for funding from the outside market. The difference between perception, especially investor perception of the market, and the reality on the ground. So this particular issue is quite prevalent, and I would actually close with it because it's the most important issue that I've seen in my last 8 years or so working in this space. A lot of investors actually perceive risk in very different terms from the way an entrepreneur might perceive risk. And so this creates a fundamental problem because then the investor's perception of risk means that if they're going to invest in your business, they're actually going to have very strict terms or even higher interest rates or cost of credit or financing that you're going to encounter. And so if you're an entrepreneur who is dealing with an investor with a higher perception of risk, case in point, raising money in the current context of COVID. There is a high perception of risk from investors in the sense that they may not be able to fly into the ground, meet your team, go to your office, and really gather a lot of the data they need to do the proper due diligence and make that investment. So that means that we're actually getting into a phase, especially around this period of COVID, we're getting into a phase where commercial capital becomes a lot harder to attract, especially for companies that have not proven their revenue or actually shown successful sort of ability to navigate through the COVID crisis. And in that case, once again, you have an influx, especially in the African market, we're going to have an influx of, let's say, grant capital because of development partners who are pouring money into the space. But does that mean that you should walk away from that capital? No, actually the advice is to leverage this type of capital that actually tries to de-risk the market as you await for the market to actually open up and sort of expand in terms of commercial growth. And what that I would say, or I would actually close with is saying, study the pattern of investments in the continent and especially in our particular region. You'll find that as global recessions ebb and flow, or the global economy ebbs and flows, 2010, we had the global economy recession. It's followed with a huge cash flow in terms of, or capital inflows into the continent in terms of soft capital. Leverage that. And then at some point, there is often this investor fatigue, which then transitions out. And then the only investors who remain are investors who understand the market, investors with a higher appetite for risk, and investors who are actually keen to work with companies on the ground. So you can shift at that point to actually commercial capital. And my closing point, this pattern often follows a 10-year cycle. You have a global recession, good time to leverage grant capital, soft capital. Around mid-year in the decade, when you're around 2015, you have a transition, lots of commercial capital now coming into the market. And then whenever the global recession sort of comes back into circulation, then you also have a flight of capital out of the market. So look at the next 10 years in that framework, and you'll be on the good side in terms of funding or fundraising. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Agostine. I love the energy and I love the clarity there. Fantastic, and hopefully everyone in the audience found that worthwhile. So we're going to move on to our final speaker for today. His name is Amyn, and he's a commercial and international finance expert. His career started off working for major banks in Southern Africa. He's also an active entrepreneur in Eastern Africa and a fellow managing partner at Stepchange Africa. Amyn will be covering investment readiness, commercial and development financing. So without further ado, over to you, Amyn.
Andrew, thank you so much. And Jordan, thanks for sharing the slides. Just as he's pulling that up, all right, thank you for that. Guys, good day, and hope all you're well. And thank you to my fellow speakers for the insightful information that they've shared so far. As Agostine just mentioned, the funding arena during this COVID period has resulted in funding being more difficult to secure. And as such, it's the idea of being ready for investment is even more critical. In my days as a commercial banker in Southern Africa, what I've always found is that the more ready a client is, would result in the faster the funding would become available, and the faster the application will move through the credit process. So I can't stress enough how important it is. And as a founder, it's always keeping financial records in order always becomes a secondary issue, just because building sales and building the market is the primary issue. But I can't stress enough how important it is to do both. When looking at being investor ready and raising capital, it's important to know the following. One, I would always recommend to businesses that they should not embark on the fundraising journey alone. Working with individuals who are fundraising experts, if you will, is always to a business's advantage, just because there are specific skills that are required to understand what funders require. The fundraising experts will know how information would need to be packaged, presented, and in order to achieve the best possible result in the shortest possible time. The second point to note is that one should always plan for fundraising activities. As I mentioned earlier, funding is harder to access now, and the due diligence processes are a lot longer. So don't think that your fundraising will be a quick win. And as such, plan for this and ensure that your business can take into account the longer funding period. And the third point is to ensure that you tick all the boxes. Funders often, whether it's commercial banks, DFIs, angel investors, impact funds, etc., will always have a list of requirements, and make sure that you tick all the boxes and you prepare all the information so that you do not waste time for yourself and for the funder. And as I earlier said, it's always important to have all the right documentation in place, be it your annual financial statements, your management account, company valuations, contracts, trading history, bank statements, and other statutory documents. And if you do not have the skill set in place, then organizations like Stepchange with the virtual CFO function can always come in and work with you and hold your hand in terms of achieving this. Jordan, can we move over to the next slide? So, the idea of development finance in Africa and in emerging markets is very prevalent. Development finance is essentially public sector resources that are designed to facilitate private sector growth. And as one of my fellow speakers mentioned, there is a trend that now development funds are being moved away from nonprofits towards the private sector, who essentially can build up markets, create jobs, and achieve a greater impact. Dfis in Africa are willing to invest if the business case is strong and the development objectives align. And that's very important to, when approaching a DFI, look at your business objectives, look at your mission and your business goals, and try to align those with the DFI's development objectives so that you can ensure that there is the right possible fit. DFIs in Africa have a strong experience, and they've been around for a number of years. And the main objectives of DFIs is that they provide economic development in the country, as I previously mentioned. DFIs will also provide financial and technical support. So, if you're in the agriculture sector, for example, a DFI might be able to link you to an agronomist who can essentially work with your smallholder farmers to improve yields, or link you up to an organization that can help guide your business growth. So that's important to know. DFIs are not commercial banks, so they're not deposit taking, but they do provide guarantees to banks, and banks can onward lend to you. And an example of that would be, if you look at some of the USAID or Mercy Corps or different projects existing in East Africa, for example, they would essentially provide a guarantee to a commercial bank, be it Equity Bank, ABSA, Centenary Bank, etc. And then on the back of that guarantee, the commercial bank would onward lend to the business or to the consumer. Some of the most common DFIs in the African space, or that operate in the African space, is the African Development Bank, the Industrial Development Corporation, which is South African based, the IFC, OPIC, Nord Funds, Swede Fund, Dfis, Bio from Belgium, etc. So this is an overview of development finance. I think we can always discuss this further and assist with linking the right development fund to the business in question. Let's move on. Well, commercial banking, I guess, is an area that I'm very passionate about. I spent most of my career working in the commercial banking space, but it's and commercial banks are the most dominant financial service provider across Africa and the developing world. In Africa, you will find a lot of international, regional, and local banks that all compete for a market share. Each of these banks have different lending requirements and different credit policies, but and it's important to when choosing a commercial bank to look at what they have to offer in comparison to what your business needs are. Commercial banks in Africa and the rest of the developing world and internationally offer a wide range of financial services. And these include deposit-taking accounts, so for short to medium-term investments. They provide loans from a personal loan up to a commercial loan, so with various ticket sizes or loan amounts. They offer a lot of trade finance products, and that's important if you're working outside your country of origin. And these trade finance products include letters of credit, be it a standby letter of credit, a site LC, or bank guarantees, and other trade finance or documentary credit products. Commercial banks also offer a product called bank insurance. And in having insurance products in place is always beneficial and oftentimes becomes a lending requirement. And this includes goods in transit insurance, etc. Commercial banks, unlike other funds, have very stringent lending requirements. And these lending requirements are often in the forms of tangible security. And when I talk about tangible security, I refer to fixed property, vehicles, other movable assets. You know, in East Africa, for example, banks haven't moved towards looking at behavioral or cash flow based lending. So, you know, fixed security is often a requirement that you cannot get away from. But that being said, there are other options that one could look at, such as credit insurance policies that sometimes banks do look at as sufficient security to offer a lending facility. The cost of debt or the lending interest rate is quite expensive, and for a top-rated customer, we're looking at about 8% cost of lending in US dollars, and it can go up to about 24% interest rate on local currency. So again, it's important to know that even if you do secure a loan from a commercial bank, can your profits and your cash flows support the cost of debt? And if that's the case, then it would make sense to move forward. If not, then it wouldn't be advisable for a business or to lose money at the cost of securing a loan. Commercial banks offer various loan terms based on the types of transactions, and this can be anywhere from a short-term loan or a temporary overdraft, which can be for a month, up to a mortgage, for example, that would be up to 20 years. So depending on what the requirement from your business is, that would dictate the loan term. So that's it for me. If there are any questions, like I said, I'd be more than happy to answer those in the Q&A and the breakout sessions. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Amyn. Really insightful work. Really appreciate that high-level overview. So moving on, just for the sake of time, we're going to skip the question and answer period. But don't worry, if you do have any questions, you do have 2 opportunities to ask those. So we're going to move over to the networking session where you can sort of raise your questions in your particular networking group, or our speakers have been kind enough to stick around for a few minutes afterwards. So after the networking session, please come back in and we'll be able to answer your questions as well as give out final remarks too. So Jordan, if you could start putting us into breakout rooms, we can then move on to the networking portion.
Sounds good. Thank you all so much. I'm going to open all the rooms now. So hopefully you got an invitation to join the breakout rooms. Yeah, let me know if you have any issues joining, but hopefully you all have access to that. So we'll come back here afterwards and close out the session. And this will be a great time to get all your questions answered.
So it looks like we can give everyone a few more seconds until they come back into the main room. While we're waiting for everyone to slowly trickle in, on your screen, you can see that there's a series of useful resources. If you're just starting on your sort of fundraising journey or looking to collect more information about sort of funding patterns or sort of investors, particularly investing in your specific sector, feel free to sort of collect all this information you see on your screen, and hopefully it'll provide some value to you. Right, I think that's a good, so I think everyone's back now. So just quickly, everyone, I just wanted to say thank you for attending today's webinar, and just to offer some closing remarks and giving out some sort of other useful bits of information. What's sort of a next step for it? And what do we recommend? A great platform to use to help attract funding is a platform called VC4A. It's Venture Capital for Africa. And what you can do is you can register your business, early stage enterprise on the platform for free. It's a very useful tool. You can put as much information or little information as you'd like. The more, the better. And that's what we highly recommend at Stepchange Africa. And it's a platform that's used actually by a lot of early stage VCs and commercial institutions in order to scout out investable early stage enterprises. Also, we recommend checking out various investor databases. It's something Amyn, Yulia, and Agostine touched upon during today's conversation. So where can you access these databases? If you just check out Africarena, TL.com, Maxime Bayen, I probably mispronounced his name. He does his own personal thing, and then also ABAN, which stands for African Business Angel Network. If you just go to the various websites, you can get access for free. Maxime, you do have to pay, but what they do is they have in each of their networks, I would say anywhere from 100 to about 150 different types of investors, and they divide them into different sectors. Sometimes it gives you their contact details, various principals, analysts, all really useful information. And last but not least, do your research. We touched upon today is sort of when is the right timing. Augustine really put that out very well. And it's really good for you to understand sort of what are the current investing trends and different patterns. So there are a series of great reports that you can download for free that give out the whole entire fundraising landscape, who's investing, how much they're investing, what sectors are getting the most amount of investment. So if you go to Brighter Bridge's website, Disrupt Africa, Partech Partners, and just type in 2020 funding report, you can get access to those reports for free. Then just to wrap everything up, on behalf of Bridges for Enterprise and Stepchange Africa, we just want to say thank you for attending today's webinar. We really appreciate it. We also want to say thank you for all the speakers on today's panel. So shortly after this webinar, you will receive an email. It will consist of a survey, and it will also give you a recording of today's webinar. So if you've missed anything or need to listen to it again, you have the power to do that. And if you'd like to learn any more information about Bridges for Enterprise or Stepchange Africa, feel free to visit either of our websites. We're looking forward to hearing from all of you, hopefully very soon. So this is the conclusion of today's webinar. So if you don't have any questions, feel free to leave. If you do have some questions for our speakers or Bridges for Enterprise or generally about Stepchange Africa, please stick on. We have about 10 more minutes. We can stay around and answer any of your questions. So thank you, everyone.